Welcome everyone to Australia's Technology-Driven Future, the Robotics Industry, a webinar presented by the Australian Academy of Technology and Engineering. This event is part of our Innovation Nation webinar series, presented by ATSE's Industry and Innovation Forum. I'm Sue Keay. I'm a fellow of ATSE and also the chair of Robotics Australia Group, which wouldn't exist if quite a few people around Australia didn't think that there were a lot of good things happening in the robotics space and that we really are on a good path to be able to form a sustainable robotics industry right here in Australia. But first, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the lands on which we are all variously meeting today. I'm presenting to you from the lands of the Turrbal and Yagara peoples, and I wish to pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging, and also to pay my respects to any Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander peoples who are joining us on this webinar today. Well, robotics is going to impact on every sector of the Australian economy and really has the potential to do enormous social and environmental good. Creating robotic technologies is going to lead to the jobs of the future and create a whole range of new possibilities. So we've assembled a fantastic panel of people who are intimately involved in the robotics industry and the development of the robotics industry here in Australia. And we're going to be running a panel discussion. And you can also, if you have questions for the panel, please use the Q&A function in the Zoom so that we can put those to the panelists near the end of the webinar. And just a note that we are recording this session and it will be available on ATSE's YouTube channel if you would like to recap or if you've missed any part of the webinar today. But first, I'd like to introduce you to our panel for today's discussion. As I mentioned, all of whom are involved in helping to shape Australia's robotics industry. We have Andrew Bate, the CEO of Swarm Farm Robotics. Andrew is the founding director, managing director and CEO of Swarm Farm and has spent a lifetime in agriculture. He has trained as an agronomist, has farms near Emerald in central Queensland, Australia, and is passionate about ensuring the future generations of farmers have a vibrant economic and sustainable future in the cropping industry. Next, we have Dr. Catherine Ball, who is the co-founder of the World of Drones and Robotics Congress and also an associate professor at the Australian National University. Catherine is a scientific futurist, a speaker, advisor, author, founder, executive producer, executive director and company director who works across global projects where emerging technologies meet humanitarian, education and environmental needs. Dr. Robin Stokes is the CEO of Bionics Queensland. Robin has spearheaded Australia's first ever Bionics Challenge and plans for a human bionics living lab community that spans bionic mobility, neurotech and neurobionics, bionic sensors and bionic implants and organs. And Dr. Farid Kendall, CTO and co-founder of Emerson. Farid has a PhD in system technologies from the University of Technology of Compiègne in France. He has over 15 years experience in research and development, integration and field testing of dependable autonomy technologies for unmanned aircraft systems. So what I'd like to do is to start by having each of the panelists give a bit of a background about themselves and their interest and involvement in the robotics industry in Australia. So I'd like to invite Andrew Bate to give us an introduction to Swarm Farm. Thank you.
Myself. Terrific. Well, thanks very much for having me here today, Sue. And it's great to join this panel. And look, my background is probably a little different to a lot of people in the robotics industry. So my background is as a farmer. I've spent 25 years farming grain crops and beef cattle. And Swarm Farm as a technology company was born out of our desire to farm better and more sustainably. And so our journey started with partnerships with University of Sydney and QUT in Brisbane to develop our first technology, and we kind of grew from there. So I'm not a technical founder in a robotics way, I'm a technical founder in agriculture kind of way in terms of the vision and how our technology gets rolled out in the industry. But there's kind of two things we do. So we build autonomous robots. There's one in the background there you can see. And we also build integrations and partnerships with other robotic companies or agricultural companies that build attachments, tools and smart technology to go on board our robots. And we set out to revolutionise agriculture with new field practices that were more sustainable. And we realised there was no way that Swarm Farm could create the hundreds and then thousands of different uses for robots in agriculture. So we built our robot as a platform, and then we help other companies who integrate their technology on board and deliver it to market. So that's a quick rundown on what we do. We're a team of 22 people. We're very unique that all of our team and all our technology is built out in rural Australia. That's one of our core values. And we're commercial in ag robotics. We have now 30 robots running across Australia. We just cracked 1 million acres of commercially farmed country across our customers here in Australia. And, you know, we're genuinely world leading in terms of what we've done in terms of rolling autonomy into agriculture. So very proud of the team we've built and what we've achieved here.
Thanks very much, Andrew. And I think the point you make about creating those jobs in regions, you know, it has quite a wide significance in that it also showcases to, you know, kids that no matter where they're located, that they can have jobs, you know, in the technology industry, and, you know, that's not restricted to the big cities. So I think it's fantastic role modeling that, you know, you have going on with a company of 22. It's fantastic.
Yeah, and it also spills into agriculture as well. We're creating new roles and new opportunities for people that are in agriculture too. So, you know, we want to see rural communities grow. We want to see more opportunities out in regional Australia. So that's something that's very important to us as well.
Yeah. Thank you, Andrew. Next, I'd like to invite Catherine Ball to give us background and her views on the robotics industry.
Hi, okay, so where do I start? First of all, I'd like to say kia ora from Auckland in Aotearoa here in New Zealand, having a wonderful time. And I suppose one of the things I want to encourage everybody who's watching this webinar is, despite the complexities of global travel, I have been to a number of countries over the last couple of months. And as Australians, we need to get out into our markets. There is a very busy world that's happening globally that I think will help us locally. So my background is in environmental science and agricultural ecology. I had a large soil science component of my undergraduate qualifications. I went on to do a PhD in spatial ecology, again, working inside the environmental science world. I then started looking into remote sensing and Earth observation and GIS. And I remember GRAS5, if anyone remembers GRAS5 as a GIS piece of software, coding in that with the RGB, you know, coordinates and things when I was doing my PhD. And what I recognized was that a lot of ecological research was led by the ecologists and not by the data scientists. And I think this is something that we're seeing now in the robotics industry, and that a lot of the robotics industry is being led purely by the roboticists rather than actually by the end use cases. And this is where things like Swarm Farm and Emerson and Bionics Queensland actually have reset the narrative on that. So I'm really grateful to be sat on a panel with such wonderful colleagues today. For me, the idea of robotics, data, drones, metaverse, the future, the way we're going to be living and working, the way our food is going to be created, the fact we will have paddock to plate without a human hand involved, the idea that we've got things like the Australian startup, The Yield, with lovely Roz there, looking at centimetre level accuracy, AI-based farming. You know, we're looking at ways in which we need to make decreasing resources work for more people. And for me, there is no future without a roboticized or more automated aspect across all of our industries. So I get very excited from a systems engineering perspective, looking at how no technology is an island, how we're all very much connected, how when we look at it from a business and entrepreneurial point of view, the risks and the opportunities that are analysed at board level don't necessarily filter down sometimes to the cutting edge of innovation. I feel like there's an education piece that needs to be made at the ASX 200 level around the capabilities of Australian robotics and what our ecosystem can actually mean for our economy going forwards. And that's not just the agricultural economy, but also our mining and resources economy, our protection of our environment around the Great Barrier Reef economy, and our health, and how our cities are built to fight obesity and fight cancer, and how we can work as a more cohesive society politically as well. I think there's a lot of risks coming, and I don't want to be a negative Nelly. I feel like there are some dark sides of the force when it comes to some of the big tech-led conversations and the way we seem to have just adopted a lot of technologies into our lives. The most powerful robotics, and the example is this, the most powerful robotics we've ever got our hands on, yet we don't know how to take it apart. We don't know how to put it back together. We've become consumers rather than creators. And I think that the gap between those two things is education, and not just university education or school education, but ongoing education. And so I suppose, Sue, if I was to speak a little out of school, if I had a magic wand, I would have us all working 4-day weeks, and on the 5th day we would be at TAFE or in the field or at university or doing something hands-on and learning, going forward, to keep our skills fresh as we enter these hockey stick levels of exponential technologies that seem to just leave us for dust. But the future is bright. We just need to make sure we have ownership of it.
I think my teenage daughters will be very depressed to hear that they might have far more future schooling to look forward to, but yes, thank you, Catherine. Next, I'd like to ask Farid Kendall to give us a bit of background, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Sue, for the introduction, and thank you for inviting me to this webinar. Yeah, my name is Farid Kendall, and I'm CTO and co-founder of MSN. Since I was young, I was always interested and fascinated by robotics and aerospace, and I wanted to do research in these areas, but I was hesitating which one to choose, and it was very hard. Luckily for me, when I started doing my engineering degree, the drones started to become a thing. And I combined really robotics and aerospace. I mean, it was no-brainer for me. I decided to do a master PhD in that area, and then worked in different places. And I ended up working on autonomous drones at CSIRO. So I have been doing that at CSIRO for 10 years, where we worked on big projects that aimed at augmenting the autonomy of drones and other robotic systems generally for some commercial applications. But after some time, it became frustrating in the sense that we haven't seen really the outcome of that research, and most of those technologies have not been commercialized. And around 2015 and 16, there was that boom of startups in drone and robotics, and we started to see all these startups in US and in Europe raising a huge amount of money and promoting things. And for us, it was frustrating because we have done awesome work and before them many years ago. So that's, I think, when I started to think that probably it's time to try to convert some of these technologies into products and solutions, but we didn't know how to go about it because I was a pure researcher. But we took that risk and we said, if others can do it, we can probably do it. We went through an acceleration program and we engaged with industries. And after some time, we found that there is really a need and interest for this type of technologies in many industries. We raised funding and we spun out from CSIRO. At that time, it was 7 of us. And since then, we have been growing and learning and also expanding our products. And we have now about 150 people. We have more than 500 products deployed with 100 customers in more than 40 countries. And our vision has evolved a lot since then. So we really believe that in the future, most industries and manufacturing facilities will become autonomous systems themselves, not just automated, but they will become autonomous systems. And as part of that, there are a number of things that need to happen. And we see ourselves are one of the enablers mainly for automating the collection and analysis of geospatial data for these industrial sites using robotics, machine learning, analytics, etc. I mean, those things will probably happen in 5 to 10 years. But in the meantime, we have developed our first flagship product that we call Hovermap. And very briefly, it's kind of a unique LiDAR-based payload that you can plug to drone or other systems. And it will provide them with not only mapping capabilities, but also with some advanced autonomy capabilities. So no one has done that before. Generally, either you have a payload that's just providing data, or the autonomy is built into the robot itself. So for us, we have come up with this plug and play concept where we have extracted the sensing and the autonomy from the robot and put it in the payload. So it has a lot of benefits in the sense that now it's versatile and you can deploy that within different robotic platforms and serve different industries. I think I will leave it here for now, but happy to answer more questions down the track.
Thanks, Farid. And now I'd like to invite Robin Stokes to give us an introduction. Thanks, Robin.
Thank you, Sue. Sue, I might just share those couple of slides if that's okay to kind of get the ball rolling. But first of all, I'll just say Bionics Queensland, we kicked off in 2020. We're into our third year, and very much with that vision of putting people at the heart of bionic innovation. And we're talking medical bionics and looking across that spectrum of bionic mobility, the bionic sensors, that neurotech, neurobionic devices, as well as implants and organs. So this actually brings soft robotics in. It brings that nexus of bionics, robotics, and regenerative medicine when it comes to implants. That, I think, is a particularly exciting area, as well as the biorobotics that you see with the mobility side of things, the exosuits and so forth. But I'll just give you a quick, I'll just do a couple of quick slides, Sue, because people actually, we do find, and if I can just swap this over, all different views about what bionics is and isn't. I'd love to just give that sense that it has gone way beyond interfaces, what exobionics was, if you like, where you just strapped various pieces and prostheses on. It's very much now about implants, interventions and interfaces. So we're talking really about that interfacing of biological systems, whether it be with nano, neuro, electronic, mechatronic, AI, and of course, robotics centrally within all of that. Our mission, of course, is to transform lives of people living with disability, could be trauma or injury related, lifelong disability. And from there, it's obviously treatment of chronic diseases with a raft of bionic treatments that are available. And also, basically looking after people potentially too that want to optimise performance. It's not just about restoring human capability, but possibly also optimising human performance in the face of, say, parasports opportunities. So we really look at bringing diverse stakeholders together. We are a not-for-profit, so we're set up not to actually be producing or developing the devices ourselves, but rather taking people and assisting them through the pipeline to market. So very much, and Queensland has an enormous opportunity, as does Australia, to build out that design, development, manufacturing, frankly, collaborations across borders, both within the country and across continents. And really, we've got an enormous opportunity in that interface of medical bionics. So just to be quick, this does require us to be absolutely across market dynamics, absolutely across health economics, regulation, and getting all of the right funding in place, of course, as well. I wanted to just give you the sense, it's just the top part of this. Do not panic at this hugely academic looking diagram, but really we do have implants and organs, tissue engineering and soft robotics. That is where we're seeing that fantastic work with things like tissue engineered vascular grafts being trained in the lab using soft robots. We're seeing biorobotic organs, and of course this is the massive area where we're really looking at the digital human. And we're looking at responding to that neuromuscular modelling to really see that interface between biorobotic limbs, e-stimulation, neurostimulation, VR, AR, and a full suite, if you like, of what we might call robotic rehabilitation with bionics in the midst. There's so much else going on, I can't tell you today fully about it, but most definitely the soft robotics alongside what you might predictably see, this is what you're thinking probably more, or some people will be, about how far we've come with upper limbs, for example, and they are robotic arms. We've had so far that use of the arm to be able to get, we've got targeted muscle reinnervation, we've got pattern recognition software, we've got some work on a sense of touch, but this project quite recently, which I was going to give you a really quick look at, is really where we're now making that neural connectivity. We've now got that intuitive piece coming through, where effectively a person with an amputation is starting to control like a person that has got no amputation whatsoever. So this down the bottom just gives you a look inside the black box, if each of the small black boxes that have finger control. So we're moving towards, I think, quite quickly, and in this part of the world very soon, getting much more of the neural connectivity we've all been waiting for. we're seeing exosuits, exoskeletons get to the next level, less heavy, better batteries, better, lots of things are improving with that. This particular one excites me that it's the top, the chap walking, because here we have the robotic exosuit adapting to his real world walking tasks in a matter of seconds. So we've got a really fast paced at-home solution coming from a bionic robotic perspective. And the last one I'll share, and then I'll stop, Sue, is this one where we can see one of the holy grails in tissue engineering is to get to that muscle and cartilage level, particularly for people in wheelchairs for many, many years. If we can see now the things such as this electrochemical actuator, that uses these specialised organic semiconductor nanotubes inside a tissue engineered muscle, as is depicted here in a hypothetical sense, but we've certainly got the actuators underway. We're now starting to see that challenge that's been there, from going from just having the tissue engineered body part to then having the robotics coming in at that soft level to really create the mobility of the muscle required. So that's just a bit of a taste, really. So at the bigger picture, we've got lots of applications of robotics in health, but I'll wait until you get to the discussion to tell you about that. And I just need to end this show, get my mouse to work. Sorry.
Thanks very much, Robin. So, I mean, I think for many people, Bionics seems like, also almost a bit like science fiction.
Yes.
But in reality, one of Australia's most successful medical device companies, Cochlear, has been around for a long time. So Australia has got a rich heritage in the development of bionics technology.
Very much so. And I think the sensors, we've, unbelievable corollaries now from the Cochlear across to the bionic vision systems, and indeed an amazing innovation coming out of the States for a bionic sense of smell, which has got similar principles off the back of the Cochlear.
Yeah, well, and just a reminder to everybody who is watching the webinar today that if you do have questions for our panelists, we will set aside some time to answer them. So please use the Q&A function to put any of your questions down, and we will try and get to them near the end. But first, I would like to ask our panelists, and I'd like everyone's view on this, please, is why do you think robotics is critical for Australia's technology-driven future? And we might just go in the same order as we did for the introduction. So, Andrew, I'll start with you.
Just unmuting that. Look, I think, there's an entire wave of technology floating through industries now, whether it's agriculture, manufacturing, our personal lives, and in terms of Australia, we need to think about how we play it. What part are we going to play in that in the future? Are we going to be end users and consumers of this technology? Are we going to create value, and what value can we capture in Australia, and what are the opportunities for growth in our country? So that's probably I think when I think about what new jobs are going to be created, what economic opportunities are going to be created, that's one of the big things here for Australia, because we're on the cusp of this right now. We're actually quite strong in technology and robotics, and while there's a lot happening overseas, there's a hell of a lot happening here in Australia, and we've been leaders. Like, look at what robotics has done in the mining industry and how that was pioneered out of Australia, and think about how this can be transposed across another industries. So that's probably my initial comment on it, and happy to pass across to whoever's next.
Yes, Catherine, why do you think robotics is important to Australia's technology-driven future?
Oh, look, I think automation and robotics are actually fundamental to new industries being born from Australia, how we can be a lighthouse to the rest of the world. But this actually comes back to what might seem as very unrobotic industries, which are actually legislation and regulation. And so health and safety legislation has turned the drone industry from a carrot into a stick. And everyone will be quite familiar. Our health and safety legislation in this country states something along the lines of, there's this idea of, if there is a known available technology that can do a particular thing, but you still insist on using a methodology from 100 years ago, and that person gets injured, then you're in real trouble. Because if we know that things can be good, and use robotics and automation and various other new technologies, and we choose to ignore those technologies as a board director, you know, you actually are then at risk legislatively from putting your staff at risk unnecessarily. And so we always talk about how technology leads regulation, but I've not experienced that in the drone industry. I think what we've experienced was that we were the first country in the world 20 years ago in 2002 to have any form of drone legislation and regulation, which would allow us to operate commercially. Right. So then as soon as we started getting experimental work like the things I was doing 10 years ago, where we were flying beyond line of sight 300-400 kilometers from where we launched to do turtle surveys in Western Australia, they were world first pieces of work run by Australians for Australians and Australian native. We didn't hurt any turtles. We just took photos of them, you know, run on Australian native flora and fauna. The problem that we always come up against is there's always a world first. But where's the world second? Where's the third? Where's the fourth? And this comes down to scalability, which means you need to have a full economic, regulatory and legislative framework to allow not only the experimentation to happen, but to allow that to then be commercialized. I mean, Farid will be able to talk about this till the cows come home with what they've done with Emerson and how that spun off from federally funded research. And Australians, we're really good at federally funding research. So, you know, in Melbourne, we've got the first, and maybe I don't want to steal your thunder around this one, Robin, but you know, that first computer brain interface is going into human trials. It's happening in Australia. It's not happened because of Elon Musk. It's happened because of taxpayer funded research. We look at Wi-Fi and Cochlear, you know, so as a country, though we might only seem to be 25 million people on the opposite side of the planet to some of the larger stock exchanges that exist, we punch above our weight in terms of project-based and I'd suggest, I want to use the term tech for good, you know, opportunities around scaling and commercializing technologies, but we need to get better at it. We've always been good at the R&D. The C is the thing that kills us in many ways. And it was what forces companies like Atlassian to move to Silicon Valley, because we don't have that base of investment. So with our new government coming in now and seeing some of these amazing dollar figures, which almost seem like monopoly money to me because they're just so out of a dreamscape, you know, in terms of the amount of money that's being put into some of these technologies, ag tech, bionics, mRNA technologies. New South Wales government just released something today on that one. You know, the fact that we are actually seeing an investment in technologies as a core fundamental economic need, not just desire, but need for Australia to stay ahead, for me is just such a no-brainer. And I guess I'm just too far down the coal mine to see it any other way. I'm really excited, but I feel like we have work to do, particularly around areas like diversity and inclusion. And I think we definitely have work to do in terms of scalability and supporting our startups to actually become global names and global leaders. And that's one of the reasons why I created the whole network of what is World of Drones and Robotics Global, was to try and provide those gateways that Austrade and Trade and Investment Queensland and you know, Trade New South Wales, you know, to try and augment that with the geek to the chic, I suppose, from the researcher perspective and the startup perspective to the regulatory perspective. So no technology is an island, no industry is an island. And we have to recognize that we need that full gamut of support at all levels. So there's no gatekeepers that prevent us from expanding. But don't let me get on my political soapbox, Sue.
Thanks, Kath. And next I'll hand over to Farid to ask, you know, why do you think robotics is critical to Australia's technology driven?
As a roboticist, I might be biased, but yeah, I think the digital transformation and automation is really happening. I mean, all the reports and the data are showing that. And then the question for us is, do we want to be a leader or a follower? Do we want to be a contributor or a consumer? Generally, as a nation, we want to be a leader, and and it will have a lot of benefits, including like economical benefits by turning this into an opportunity to generate more revenue for Australia, more jobs by exporting these products and technologies to other countries. I think that's on one hand. On the other hand, as Catherine said, the government and Australia has invested a lot in these technologies, especially in the R&D space, and it feels like it will be waste of money and loss of opportunity if we don't take it to the next level and convert this into products that we can really commercialize. And also, with third point, like Australia has a lot of industries that rely heavily on the workforce and people, like agriculture, mining, and many others. As we are already starting to see like shortage of workforce in that space, whether the lack of people like in general, or people willing to do this type of jobs. And the only way really to mitigate that is try like to automate some of those operations. And if we don't do that, those industries like will suffer in the future. And of course, like buying and importing technologies from overseas, which are not like optimized for those industries in Australia, will have implication. I think there are, yeah, for me, it's really a no-brainer, and there are a lot of benefits of doing that. The question is really, yeah, how to do that.
Thanks, Farid. And Robin, final say.
Yes, well, look, I suppose when it comes to the world that I live in, I see that robotics is absolutely central to health innovation. If you want to be in the business of health innovation, robotics lies at the heart of it. And then, of course, we look to service delivery in health, and it's absolutely essential in a country as big as Australia. In effect, the people we need to reach and their involvement and engagement with the health services of the future will totally depend on that robotic enablement. If we think about remote and rural delivery of allied health in support of new bionic innovations, we look at that and we think of a farmer that's taken his leg off in a fencing accident in Western Queensland, or we think of somebody living with diabetes in a remote community. Think of Indigenous communities in the Northwest. Really robotically enabled guidance, if you like, that we're seeing already offshore, you know, the guidance by the specialist through a robot at the other end as to how that initially advice, guidance, application of allied health solutions, all of that can happen through that remote robot. And in effect, I can see that certainly there's a huge education curve to bring the regions as well as the cities up to the level of insight and education about how will this work. Will I be in a brave new world I cannot relate to? Well, in health, you don't want that feeling. So you have to educate and have to bring people on the journey of where the human element will come through alongside the robotic, especially in health service delivery. The point is, in Australia, we have 3 bionic vision projects. They are all leading lights in the bionic vision world. We've seen the cochlea come out of Australia and all of the innovations I've mentioned before in the sensors that have spun out of that. We're seeing unbelievable work with the Biospine project on the Gold Coast. So you've got that interface between that neuromuscular modelling, biorobotic solutions, you know, that interface that really will see the next level of innovation. We've got talent in this country. We just don't harness it and take it up to the next level in terms of turning it into an industry, a robust ecosystem, the connectivity Catherine talked about, you know, with our commissioners offshore that are dealing with companies that could invest in this type of innovation. Bringing that whole system around the talent we've got. You know, it's too late to go back. We are part of a leadership role, really, when it comes to robots, drones, bionics, etc. So now's the time to build an industry around it.
Thanks, Robin. Well, now I'd like to get into a bit more detail about, you know, the actual doing of building the industry. And I'll just go back to something, Farid, that you mentioned, that at about the time Emerson started, there did seem to be, you know, a huge acceleration in the number of robotics companies that were starting up around the world. But I guess I'd like to delve into, you know, some of the challenges that startup robotic companies face in Australia, and, you know, whether that's different to startups in other parts of the world, you know, to get your perspective on that. And then I'll hand over to Andrew to get a perspective on some of the difficulties of starting up a company in this space. So Farid?
Yeah, thank you for the question. Yeah, as you know, starting a company or a startup is always challenging, and I assume like everyone faces like similar challenges, but being in Australia, I think has some additional challenges. It has its benefits too, a lot of benefits, but in terms of the challenges that we faced for ourselves, access to capital and IP has been very hard compared to what's happening in US. I think it's changing and it's much better now, but it's still far from the capital and the terms that are like available in US. The other one is really access to IP. Like for us, we spun out from CSIRO, and although, I mean, we have a very good relationship, it took a lot of time, and we found that there is no standard framework or way about how to do this type of things compared to US, where they have very common frameworks, and it's very easy for investors and startups to approach companies, and they can have a deal with very favorable terms in a short term. So here in Australia, it's still, I think it's done in an ad hoc way, case by case, and it's still a struggle. The other one, it's an obvious one, is really access to talents. Especially in this space, robotics and autonomous systems, and COVID hasn't made it any easier. That's why a lot of companies are establishing like divisions and offices in other countries, mainly to access talents, but also for other things. One thing that we notice, especially when you are in B2B business and you are selling your products to big enterprise companies, like having that international credibility and visibility is very challenging. Because generally companies, when they buy your product, they don't look only to the product and technology, but they look to the company, if they will be there in 2-3 years, if they can support them, etc. And being a tiny startup in the other part of the world, it doesn't make it easy, and it needs a lot of efforts and work to educate the customer and build really that trust and relationship. One thing that we are facing now, at some stage you need to start growing and scaling up, and for that you need like to build team and have executives who have done that before. And scaling and growing a company in the robotics space is very different from scaling a company in other areas, because it's hardware, it's robotics as a service, is it SaaS, is it software, it's very challenging. And finding people who have done that and grown companies from 100 people to 1,000 people in this space, yeah, it's very hard to find those people here in Australia, and we are like engaging specialized firms and recruiters to try to find those people overseas, especially in US and Europe. But then we have that challenge, like convince those people to move to Australia. It's very, very hard. Yeah, these are some of the challenges that we felt. There are more, but these are the top ones.
Thanks, Farid. And Andrew, how did you go starting up Swarm Farm?
Yeah, I guess first comment I wanted to do was probably tweak something that Catherine said earlier about R&D versus C commercialisation, and it's a tweak, but I think it's actually fundamental. We in this country, we roll R&D together, and they don't mix. Research is discovery is new to science. Development is not done by researchers at all. I remember in our early days sitting down with researchers we're working with saying, we need to make discoveries new to science that can be published. And we're on another planet as a technology company taking a product to market. We're not interested in discoveries new to science that can be published. We're interested in taking new technology to an industry to revolutionize it. And so we have a policy problem in this country where we wrap R&D together, and they shouldn't be. R should be wrapped in with C, and D should be wrapped in with C, development and commercialization, because development's taking some new idea and developing it to something that can be commercialized, and there's no research in that. And we're seeing kind of light in the tunnel, I think. We've been talking to government about this for a long time, and we've also and also industry, and we're seeing some of the RDCs, as in the cooperative research centres in Australia, starting to react, and through CRDCs and Horde Innovation and GRDC starting to realise this. I think we're seeing initiatives like the Hinkler AgTech initiative at Bundaberg, where they're funding projects to do the development work so a product can be commercialised and delivered to industry. And there's been this big hole there where we've always said, oh, we're doing the R&D, now you can go and do C, commercialise it. And you can't commercialise research. So I think that's a fundamental kind of conversation that's been started now, and people are starting to understand. But if we're going to get these great ideas and the great work our researchers are doing out there, we've got to separate D, development, out before we can actually jump across to commercialization. So that's probably the first thing. I agree also with what Farid said about obviously investment capital and to grow. And I think part of it, we need to think, how much investment can we actually achieve, and how can we leverage that better in Australia? Like, how can we keep ownership of some of the IP and the technology and the companies we have inside the country as well? Obviously, for high growth, often outside capital needs to come in, but also keeping, maximising the investment we can actually get in Australia to keep the ownership of companies and some level of IP in this country, because that generates, you know, value for future Australians, and also for the founders that are working in their companies, building these companies, to actually keep those skills and that mentorship and all the other things in this country for other companies that are building, in terms of role models and being able to help other companies as well as we build that experience. So obviously, you know, you look overseas and it looks like money rains from the sky in terms of what you have to do here in Australia to raise similar amounts of money or similar terms in terms of investment and how we grow opportunities. So, and it comes back to what I said earlier about, are we going to be, you know, end users and consumers of technology? Are we going to create and capture some of the value here in Australia and keep it in Australia? So I think that's certainly, you know, one of the difficulties as a, you know, growing technology company. I think, you know, they're probably the two things that come to mind, I think, in terms of, you know, how we grow faster and commercialize technology and get it delivered in Australia, and then grow also to be a global company as well. I mean, this comes back to the, you know, the access to IP that was mentioned earlier as well. You know, we have a lot of IP sitting in you know, research organizations that's very hard to access as a company that wants to develop it, and there seems to be an implied value on it that often doesn't exist in the real world. And, you know, trying to prize that IP out so you can actually start to develop it so it can be commercialized is often a challenge as well. And, you know, we are great at creating new technology, and our researchers do a fantastic job of developing new things to science. And we've got to be fantastic and awesome at now taking that research through to development so it can be commercialized. I think that's a big target for us as well.
Thank you, Andrew. And I'm going to go over to Catherine now, just to check in, you know, with your experience in the drone industry, Catherine. You know, are you hearing about these challenges? And I mean, you know, there does still seem to be a bit of a, you know, a line between drones and robotics companies, but are they now becoming indistinguishable? Because, you know, for example, I actually don't know how to describe Emerson. Is it a drone company? Is it a robotics company? It's quite...
Oh, well, look, I'm from Warwickshire in England originally, which is where Shakespeare comes from. So I'm just going to say, a rose by any other name would smell as sweet. And the key here, I think, is not to try and label industries in deep verticals, and to recognize that we're all so interconnected. The Venn diagram is one great big blot, right? It's just one great big thing. So drones for me are robotics, but not all robotics are drones. And so if I was really thinking about why I fell in love with the idea of drone technology, it wasn't because of the drone platform itself. It was because of the manner in which it could carry different types of sensors, process information on board, use satellite communications or other forms of communication to operate in areas where humans couldn't get, or we didn't want to put them, to capture information quality, decision quality information, to allow us to make better decisions about how we then managed that situation or monitored that situation. So for me, I have the world of drones and robotics, because we recognize that the drone industry, when it started really 20 years ago, and the mushroom cloud that it became, has now started retreating back on itself. There's been some really interesting mergers and acquisitions that I think are actually signals to how this industry is going to behave going forwards. So a couple that really stick out to me is the fact that we've had a lot of really great Australian startups in the drone space that have just disappeared. Some of them went to Silicon Valley too early, got too much money from the wrong people, and then the ROI was too great. The product wasn't ready. They didn't have a minimum viable product. And there's been a lot of what would we say? There's been a lot of overstating of possibilities rather than statement of realities, because we all hope for the things that we want to create outside of technologies. So there's been a real regrounding around the abilities and capabilities of technologies to actually work right now if you were to deploy it immediately. Now, I'm an optimist with all of this technology, so I know how great it can be, but that difference between the R, the D, the C, and the application of it, the actual full-on scalability of it, they are different conversations. They're different parts of the ecosystem. They're different parts of the pipeline, or the London Underground, you might want to suggest. Another acquisition that I thought was incredibly, well, I was very prescient about it, I predicted it completely, was that Hyundai, the car company, bought Boston Dynamics. Now, you've got to ask yourself, why would a Japanese car company buy a robotics company? Well, I'm like, why wouldn't they? And when you look back at some of the trials that Audi were doing, they had these trial vehicles and test vehicles, like Toyota have bought a flying car company. So this one that I love, I'm just going to geek on this for a second. Just imagine it's like a smart car or a Mini, and on the roof you've you've got interchangeable capabilities. So you get stuck in that traffic on the Gold Coast that's really annoying. You can literally dial in your rooftop drone add-on that you've pre-purchased or pre-hired. It will attach itself to your roof, and then you will lift up and fly over all of that traffic. And so Audi were actually working on some of these, is it a car or is it a drone? What is it? Well, it doesn't really matter. What it's doing is the thing that matters, how it operates, the safety of the environment in which it's operating, why it's operating, what it's producing. And so if you put this into things like, Tesla and some of these, Tesla, it turns out to be, and people won't really recognize this, as an entity, Tesla has probably more satellites than any other car company has. Right. So Tesla is actually a satellite company that's just controlling cars. So it's like you've got to flip the mirror sometimes on some of these technologies and say, well, does it matter what we call it? Because really it's what it does for us that matters. The fact that these are all convergent technologies, we are literally condensing down things, into the size of our pockets. And such will be the same as, the technology that both Farid and Robin and Andrew are all sitting on the edges of and developing, that they're convergent things, right? So they are AI, machine learning, large data processing. Where is that data being stored? Is it being held in sovereign storage centers? Is it going offshore? Is it in the cloud? Where is it owned? What's the cybersecurity around that? You remember the hacking that started really going up in scale around the mRNA vaccines? How do we protect our IP, let alone unlock it? How do we actually protect it from cybersecurity attacks? How do we also... We had this thing, and Robin, I don't want to worry you too much about bionic limbs and things, but we had this issue with the hackability of drones, right? So if we're going to have transhumanism and augmented humans with technologies, how do we protect them from being hacked? And then we get to the places like the metaverse, and then we're suddenly onto multimodal platform sensing and ways in which we're going to be interacting in a digital world in the next 10 years that I don't think we've really actually got our heads around. One of the things I like to ask people is, has anyone got an implantable technology? I'll just stand there in this front. So who's got an implantable? And you get the odd person with a pacemaker and maybe an insulin pump that will go, yeah, I've got implantable, or a cochlear. I've got implantable technology. And I'm like, great. Anyone else fancy it? Anyone want to put like their chip in their wrist to pay the bills or whatever? You don't need a chip in your wrist. I have your face. Like, I can work out who you are and charge things according to facial recognition. So some of these technologies are more advanced than others purely because of the economics that they can work in, the business models that they work in. And so I don't really know where my point was going with all of this, other than the drone industry is not a drone industry. The robotics industry is not a robotics industry. The data industry is not a data industry. We're all part of the same, food web and food chain. We are the London underground of all of these types of technologies, and it's where we connect is where the magic really happens, I suppose.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks, Catherine. We do have a question from the audience, but before we go to that, I wanted to ask Robin a question, and then I'd also like to make sure we have enough time at the end for each of the panelists to wrap up and give us their top tip, on how to take advantage of these future opportunities and help to build a sustainable robotics industry in Australia. But Robin, I'm hoping that you might, be able to give us an idea of where I guess you've already painted a picture that Australia is really at the forefront in terms of the application of robotics in healthcare. But is there anything else you'd like to add?
Yes, look, I think, and on my mind, I just can't take my mind off being on the Southeast Freeway, and perhaps you have a disability and you've kind of managed to you're wheeled into your car and you've got that interactivity with the car set up well so you can drive the car. Potentially, how can you lift out of that car and be the first one that flies over the top of the whole pile up of traffic to get out of there? And I think, that is potentially the future. And I'm kind of at one end of the excitement of all of that, where you think of someone that's got their home set up so everything's brain-computer interface to kind of manage, obviously, the entertainment, the lighting, lots of functions in the home. And then you've got the drone on the balcony where you can wheel out, wheel in, and away you go as a person living with a disability. So there's a massive future there. And then I'm brought back to some of the comments Andrew was making, which I see every day. Through our Bionics Challenge each year, we have university researchers and we've got startups. Largely, it's those two blocks of people. Very different in terms of their exposure to the pipeline of what needs to happen to get to market. We've got a different structure in universities for commercialisation where lots of things get parked, dare I say it, while there's other very big projects that have got the first priority to, work with industry and get those to market. So there's a lot of brilliant ideas sitting in there that really don't get to the next stage. And some of the training we've done to mentor those teams, and often quite young PhD researchers that take like a duck to water with what that commercialisation pathway might look like, but are obviously restrained by the time it takes to get an innovation like we're talking about to market. We've got animal trials, we've got various things to get through. So there's a time frame there. But the other piece in all of this is the startups themselves, because we don't have yet that manufacturing infrastructure ecosystem around some of our innovators, the startups. They are fantastic researchers. They're pretty good on the design side to get it to prototype and early prototype stage. But then to take that to the next level and cost out the manufacturing strategy and how that will roll out, to go and ask for their first 10 million off a family fund or whatever, that's a really hard ask, because they've got the founder trying to be the CEO, trying to be the business development manager, the commercialisation strategist. So we need, in effect, to look beyond our country, to draw those skills in, to actually build the teams, often beyond Australia, to actually have, particularly with medtech, because you've got a global market there. Australia's never going to be the market for alone for some of these innovations. So we certainly need that commercial piece, that business development piece, the insights to the cost of manufacture, let alone where it'll be manufactured, to look for the funds and get the funds to take it to the next level. So that's, I don't know whether I answered your question actually, Sue, but they're the people.
No, thanks, Robin. I think that's an important point, that access to global markets is actually a very important component in terms of, you know, what we think of in the future of a sustainable robotics industry. Yeah, so thanks for that, Robin. Now, Andrew, I might throw the question from the audience your way, because you did mention that you have been having some discussions with government around policy. And the question is, where do you see the government's role in promoting, continuing and scaling the development of Australia's robotic industry? Do you have a view on that?
I think, you know, in terms of getting more technology rolled out, I think there's opportunities for clusters, and we mentioned, Robin mentioned manufacturing before and helping build. I mean, we have a low manufacturing base here in Australia right now, and I think as a nation we've realised just how important manufacturing is to be able to be self-sufficient and have sovereign security in terms of some of the things we manufacture in this country. So I think, you know, one of the roles for government is actually championing the companies that are manufacturing, and also getting behind the companies that are aspiring to manufacture, and government being able to help promote that, and also bring skills in and expertise that some of these companies that are growing need, whether that be supply chain. And there's ways that government can help, you know, companies that are starting off manufacturing, you know, trying to scale up when supply chains the toughest it's ever been in the history, I think, of Australia. Perhaps the Second World War supply chain may have been as constrained as it is now, but you know, that's a real challenge for a company that's early stage, that has risk of what they're selling and the, you know, the forecast of what they're doing. I think also, you know, you've always got your early adopters and your champions in an industry that's growing, and a new product that's being delivered to market. So things like tax breaks and incentives, so early adopters in terms of adopting new Australian products and services in the robotics industry, so that the people who are taking risk and putting their trust in growing Australian companies and delivering something very innovative, you know, a tax break to reward the early adopters and the people that back Australian companies and Australian robotics companies that are growing. You know, there's things there, and you see government providing, you know, contracts and things for services type companies to supply to government to get them started at an early stage. You know, can we look at how that could work for robotic companies? Obviously, for a company that's providing a service, if they can get a contract with government, gives their first sale, that's really helpful. You know, how can we do something that helps robotic companies who are hardware based or tech based to get their first customers and grow? I think that's going to help the industry overall.
Thank you, Andrew. And yeah, I mean, I think the other thing, you know, government clearly has a really important role to play in terms of what a few panelists have mentioned about, you know, in the education space, and making sure that we're upskilling the whole population to be able to cope and take the best advantage of a lot of these technologies, which would then have flow-on impacts to benefit robotics. So, I'm sure we could probably keep going on that particular question, but I want to give everyone a chance, just a quick 1 minute to describe, the key takeaway or top tip that you'd like to leave the audience with, about how we can take advantage of these future opportunities and help build a sustainable robotics industry. So, Farid, I might start with you.
I think we touched a little bit on this before, especially about the terminology, what is a drone, what is a robot, etc. I mean, we are still learning. We are a very young and small company, but I think if we want to really commercialize and be successful in this space, we need really to enlarge our definition and think more of a solution rather than a robot. Because at the end, that's what really will provide value to the customer, and a robot is just a component of that. I think that's very, very important. And also, even like the definition of the autonomous system itself is evolving, and it won't be just that's a car or drone. Like in the future, when you have an entire mind unmanned and autonomous, what do we call an autonomous system? And for us at Emerson, that's really what we are starting to work on, like try to imagine this autonomous system of the future and come up with a roadmap and try then to position ourselves and trying to seek like partners who can help us achieve that. It may seem obvious, and we always talk about that, ecosystem and partners, etc. But generally, it's not many people are implementing that correctly. And once you start thinking about the solution and not just the tool, I think that's where it becomes a little bit easier really to work in a productive way with partners and other companies.
Thanks, Farid. Kath, your quick takeaway.
Yeah, so I mean, Farid's absolutely got the nail on the head there. I mean, even Einstein said, when you've got a problem, you think about the problem for 90% of the time and the solution for 10% of the time. And I think if we understood more about the problems we were trying to solve and less about the technology that people were trying to sell, I think that would actually help accelerate the industry. It sounds the wrong way around, but actually I think that is the right way around. The other thing that I really hope is that all robotics platforms understand that they're actually part of a big data tsunami that's hitting us like a ton of bricks. If you're not preparing your data processes, data storage, looking at things from the carbon footprint side of things as well, like data storage estimated, there was a study that came out and it was 10 years time, 25% of our global carbon footprint will come from data storage alone. That's before we start talking about Web3 and NFTs and all the extra blockchain copies that we're going to have of things. And so if we think about how in both consuming and producing data as part of these platform technologies, I think that's a really interesting way to look at where some new business models might come from.
Thanks, Kath. And I'll hand over to Robin. What's your key takeaway?
My key takeaway or take out message, I suppose, would be that really we need to think of this as a two-speed approach, because we can see people working at the cutting edge with amazing projects, but on the ground, we're really wanting to help people and communities. So if I go to Rockhampton to launch the Bionics Challenge, I need to know about small businesses that are in that community, small robotic businesses, others that are in the data space, data management space. It's about understanding communities and how communities grow into industries and bring that contribution, because we often think top end. I can go and do a slideshow that'll blow you away on bionic innovation, and I could lose the whole Rockhampton community. So I have to actually be a two-speed approach so that I can bring a community on the journey so that we can create an industry where we want these clusters. Most definitely the community needs to understand the opportunity and feel the need.
Yeah, thanks, Robin, great point. And Andrew, final takeaway from you.
Yeah, and probably a bit of a statesman view, but and perhaps a little different, but new opportunities and new industries need champions. And I think amongst everyone on this call here, there's champions within our organisation and champions that we know, and by celebrating those champions and putting them on a pedestal, we can inspire other companies and other opportunities within our own country. And whether that's the next company that's coming into the robotics industry, whether it's an established player that's struggling, whether it's researchers creating new technologies coming to robotics. By championing those those people and inspiring other Australians, I think there's a great opportunity in that alone.
Thanks very much, Andrew. And what a great way to close. We are at time. Thank you to all of our panelists today for giving us such an insight into what is really such a broad industry that can be applied in so many different ways. So thank you, Andrew Bate from Swarm Farm Robotics, Catherine Ball from World of Drones and Robotics Congress Global and Australian National University. Thank you, Farid Kindle from Emerson and Robin Stokes from Bionics Queensland. And just a reminder that the Australian Academy of Technology and Engineering is very proud to be bringing the Day of AI to Australia for the first time this year. It's going to be held on the 27th of July. It's an opportunity where teachers can actually join in, and Luke's just put a link to how you can register for Day of AI in the chat for people to look at. But 27th of July, it's a great opportunity, even if you're not involved in the education space at all. It's just a fantastic time to think about talking about AI with other people, and in general how AI is part of people's lives, and you know, how people can potentially be part of the AI and robotics industries in the future, which hopefully, after speaking to our panel today, the future will be bright for those industries in the future in Australia. So thank you once again, and yes, look forward to seeing the results of all of these ideas coming to fruition. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sue.
Thank you. Thank you, team.
Bye.